Hi, my name is Sarita Fontanesi, and I'm the Black constituency organizer with the Texas Democratic Party. Welcome to some of the highlights from our State of Black Texas, done in partnership with the Black Women's PAC and the Texas Coalition from Black Democrats. Enjoy.
PAC, sorry about that. And Vice Chair of Programs for the Tarrant County Black Democrats. Today, as partners, the Black Women's PAC, the Texas Coalition of Black Democrats, and the Texas Democratic Party are popping up a virtual tent and laying the groundwork for an annual discussion, the State of Black Texas. Although the issues we'll discuss today are not new, they are issues that affect all cultures, but Black Americans have historically been targeted, tripped, and blocked by this country's systems. I believe if you address the effects of disenfranchisement and discriminatory practices on our culture, you'll fix the nation. So the purpose of this event, which Carol Robinson's brainstorm, is to have a conversation and a cohesive conversation before the general election. And if you're not registered to vote, by the way, please do so and go to texasvotes.org and share that information with people that you know that might not be voted and not have registered to vote. I'm joined today by Sarita Robinson, who is the Black Constituency Coordinator for the Texas Democratic Party, Dr. Carla Braley, again, Carol Robinson, and a host of professionals, academics, activists, candidates, elected officials, and leaders, all representing a piece of our life's landscape. As the day progresses, we'll hear from panelists on criminal justice reform and criminal injustice reform, as Layla Brown with the Texas Civil Rights Project says. We'll also talk to Rachel Cooper and Allison Stevens about the intersectionality of health and poverty. And the environment. We'll talk to education administrators and board members like the Honorable Mia Hall, who is the founding principal of Young Women's Leadership Academy in Fort Worth, and now vice chair on the Crowley ISD board. Our closing conversation is with the Texas Association of African American Chamber of Commerce, member Courtney Johnson Rose, and other executive directors, along with Carol Robinson and Nikki Bailey, who is an economic advocate. So we want to just move along, and I want to introduce Carol Robinson, who is going to talk about the coalition and why we're here today. So Carol, go right ahead. Carol, you got to unmute. Let's see. Ask to unmute. Oh, it's not unmuted.
Can you hear me
Here
now?
we go.
There he
I can
is.
hear you now.
Yeah, you know, that's the problem on a Labor Day. This is supposed to be a day of rest, but
Yeah.
we're laboring today. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Let me take care of a couple of housekeeping things, and then we can move on. We chose today intentionally to do this program because Black people in this country have always labored, but we are in the midst of now trying to move from just being laborers to a different kind of agenda around wealth and prosperity. And to get to wealth and prosperity, you have to make transformational change in the system. And the topics for today's conversation are to start this substantive discussion. We're having a political conversation about changing the legislature in Texas, but politics is a means, not an end. If we're going to change the legislature, if we're going to elect more Democrats, then we want to have a substantive agenda that when this change occurs and we go into the 2021 legislative session, there are substantive public policy issues that we want to have not just discussed, but enacted into law. Tracy and the Black Women PAC over the last 2 years have had conversations around what they call the Policy, Politics, and Donor Summit. And that was the start of having some serious substantive conversation identifying experts, and starting to lay the groundwork. So today's conversation, today's State of Black Texas, is a continuation of those conversations. We'll have another Black Women's PAC, as I understand it. We'll do one more policy, politics, and donor summit after the November election, and then we'll roll into the 2021 legislative session. But I wanted to take off the table, at least in part through the coalition, this question of what's the Black agenda, by having this conversation, identifying the experts, and touching on not just criminal justice reform or trying to fix the injustices in the criminal justice system, but to talk about environmental justice, healthcare, economics, education, the entire panel of issues that we as Black people and progressive people, people for reform, need to have as Democrats in Texas. So I want to thank Tracy and Sarita for organizing this. I want to acknowledge the Texas Democratic Party, and I want to acknowledge the other officers inside the coalition. Our Vice Chair of Program, Sharon Berry, our Vice Chair of Membership, Kim McLaurin, our Vice Chair, I see you in the corner, Kim, that's McLeod, that's why I called your name. You were having a psychological effect, but it's Kelly McLaurin, who's our Vice Chair of Membership for the statewide coalition, Patrick Aroni, who's our Interim Vice Chair of Finance, Constance Jones is our Treasurer, Eric Igwa is the Constance's Secretary, Eric is our Treasurer, and he's also President of the Tarrant County chapter. Our parliamentarian is Donald Williams out of El Paso. The coalition has about 21, 23 chapters across the state, and we've been enhancing our infrastructure in preparation for this November's election. We've been working with the party earlier, end of July, just one little thing, end of July, early August, in partnership with the Texas Democratic Party and Beto O'Rourke's Powered by People. We reached out to, by live calls and text messaging, to 1 million African Americans across the state of Texas. So Carla, as Vice Chair of the Texas Democratic Party, I want to thank you and the chairman. And then the party has just finished reaching out to 1 million unregistered Texans. We believe if we bring everybody into the conversation, substantively, that will be the best way to encourage them to go vote and then manifest through the transformation in the legislature, actual policy change. Then people will start to believe that their vote matters, and we will see a consistent increase in Democratic participation, that's small d, in our democracy. So thank you, everybody. Look forward to the conversation. And Tracy, I'll turn it back to you. You're mute.
Tracy, you muted.
Story of my life, sorry. Okay, so now we're going to hear from Dr. Carla Braley, who is Vice Chair of the Texas Democratic Party, and she will continue on. Oh, Sarita. Sarita, did you want to say hello right quick?
Oh, sure, I would love to. Hello, my name is Sarita Fontanesi. I am the Black constituency organizer with the Texas Democratic Party. Excited to be here, so excited to hear from all of our incredible panelists and moderators. You know, anytime Tracy comes to me and says she wants to put together an event, I am down because I know that it's going to be big and informative and impactful. You know, I'm really grateful to be able to work with Carol and the coalition to make sure that all of our community is heard and ready to go for early voting, which starts October 13th, because we're going to get out there way before November 3rd to make sure that folks know that we are here to make sure our state represents us. So that's it for me. I will turn it over to Vice Chair Dr. Braley, and excited for today.
Well, hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm hoping that I'm not muted, because that's what happens on a lot of these calls. We think that we're talking, and we are, but no one can hear us. And just like we've been laboring since we arrived in the United States, we want to make sure that everyone knows that we are laboring. So I want you all to be able to hear me this morning. So thank you so much, Tracy and Sarita, for hosting us this morning. We are always appreciative, so appreciative of your work, Tracy, both what you do with the Black Women's PAC, but certainly the amount of work that you're putting into Tarrant County. We all know where Tarrant County is, and we know that with proper campaigning and partnerships, particularly in the Fort Worth area, we can push that area at least light blue. And at this point, all we're concerned is blue. So we appreciate the work there. And Sarita, I can't thank you enough for the amount of work that you're doing in the nonstop approach you're taking to organizing, particularly as it relates to mobilizing Black voters. She and I talk regularly about just her vision and the way that we can really work together, both with ideas to execute and implement them so that we can have the biggest turnout across the board. We know that Texas has the largest number of Black voters, so we cannot ignore Texas. Both Texans cannot ignore Texans and the nation. This is a very, very important election, as we all know, with the state plans, and leaning on partners and joining on the ground with people in programming. We know that we can have the largest amount of voters ever in Texas, and certainly Black voters. I think, Carol, as usual with your grandiose ideas and your vision of just being unapologetic and intentional about having a Black agenda, I think more so than ever, it is important. The reality is that a lot of what we're talking about, unfortunately, is not new. And we have been doing the work of diversity. We've been doing the work of inclusion. And, right now it's a hot topic. It should have been a hot topic 100 years ago, but we know that it is now. And so we always appreciate the emails that we get at 2:00 in the morning and may not see them until 9 a.m. But your mind is always going as it relates to uplifting Black people as a whole. And as the late, great W.E. Du Bois stated in the 20th century, the problem of America at that time, he argued, was the color line, was race. And he argued that if we can spend just enough time to understand the holistic conditions of Black America, that if we spent that time, we would not only be able to solve the problems of the Negro at the time, but also when we solve those problems, we could push America closer to understanding and embrace concept of democracy. And I think that's where we are. And so I'm excited to be a part of this. I'm very excited to serve as the vice chair of the Texas Democratic Party at such a time as this. So many people made a path for me to be here. And I'm just excited that we have embraced this challenging task. And I know that if we work together, we will be stronger together. This is not going to be a perfect path, but it is a path to victory for us, that we can change this Texas, not just for the sake of turning it blue, but we know that if we can change Texas blue, we know that we can impact policies that can increase the quality of lives, and not just for Black people, but for all people. And so I am very, very, again, excited that we have taken this task to redeem the whole of the nation, to reinvigorate Black voters in Texas. We have to be willing to meet people where that matters. And it's important for us to have these type of discussions so that we can have reconciliation. So I'm looking forward to listening and learning today. Again, on behalf of the Texas Democratic Party, from our chairman to the staff, thank you for allowing us, myself, to be a part of this event, which I hope to be the first annual event. And so I look forward to seeing you all this time next year as well. Thank you, Sarita, and thank you, Tracy.
Well, Dr. Brayley, you have the first panel coming up. So that is the education on education. So we're going to just continue with you. On your panel, you have Mia Hall, who is the Honorable Mia Hall. She's a board member for Crawley ISD. Also, excuse me, the diversity chair, or not chair, but the diversity director with Fort Worth ISD, and then also founding principal from Young Women's Leadership Academy in Fort Worth. Dr. Kim McLeod, who is dean at Texas A&M Commerce. And then Aisha Davis, I'm not sure, there she is, okay. And the Honorable Aisha Davis with his State Board of Education. Dr. Brayley, it's all
All right, well,
yours.
thank you. Thank you so much, Tracy. We're going to talk a bit about education this morning. Think it's a perfect panel because it links to all the other matters that we will discuss as well today. My first question, many of you all, we know have worked in the field of education, but you also decided that you were going to lead in a way that you can impact policy. And so my first question to you is, how did you decide that this was going to be, I would say, your call to vocation, and even address why did you decide to run for office in this area? And we can start with maybe Aisha.
Well, I guess I'll jump in on that question.
Okay.
Hi, good morning.
Okay. Dr. McLeod, you want to go?
All right, can you all hear me? Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Brayley, for the invitation to join. I am a lifetime career educator. Most of my professional career is in education, from early childhood all the way to higher ed. And because of my experience in higher ed and being connected with people like Carol Robinson, being mentored and inspired by people like Glenn Lewis, working hand in hand with people like Ron Reynolds, you understand the impact education has on our community, but most importantly, our role in trying to elevate and educate not just our community, but anyone that serves our community. And you get sick and tired of African-American children being at the bottom of every statistical category that there is, over-identified in special education, over-identified in in-school and out-of-school suspension, under-identified and gifted and talented, AP placement, dual credit, college entry, highest dropout. And at some point, we have got to, and I say this to my group, the Texas Alliance of Black School Educators, all the time, at some point, we have got to get our children off the menu. They say if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And our community has been on the menu for far too long. And so it's not just enough to teach our children. We also need to have a position at the table of creating policy and legislation that works for our children and not against our children. And so part of that is, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? Why not put my name in the hat to advocate for those who are not in position, I guess the best way to say it, advocate for those who are on the menu and not at the table. And we need to have our seat. We need to have a voice, and not just any voice, a voice that understands our community, understands our needs, understands our children, understands what we need in order to get off all of our children off this underperformance, this cloud of low expectations, off the school to prison pipeline. So it's not just educators, it's criminal justice, it's working with attorneys, it's working with judges, it's creating policy that works for our kids. And so that was my motivation to run for the State Board of Education.
Thank you so much, Dr. McLeod. Aisha, would you like to join?
Sure, and thank you, and good morning.
So my name is Aisha Davis, and I do serve on the State Board of Education. Before that, I was a classroom teacher. I taught advanced sciences and engineering. But most importantly, I was an advocate for children of color to make sure that they had the curriculum that they needed to be successful for whatever future they chose. And so I was a proud member of the Texas Alliance of Black School Educators under the leadership of Dr. McLeod. And through her vision of influencing policy, and like she said, getting kids off the menu, she created something called the Texas Education Policy Institute, where teachers were specifically trained for advocacy, where we went to the Capitol and we testified before the House, before the Senate, to let them know not just what kids in Texas need, but what our Black children need to be successful. I testified before the State Board of Education talking about how to implement more social justice into all of the courses that we offer to our students in Texas. And when I realized there were no Black women on the State Board of Education, I knew I wanted to run so that I can have a seat at that table. And that's exactly what I did. So in 2018, I went from the classroom to the Capitol, and I proudly served the Dallas and Fort Worth areas.
All right, Mia.
Good morning, Mia Hall, Board President for Crowley ISD and Executive Director for Equity and Excellence in Fort Worth ISD. I too, my path is a little bit untraditional in the sense that I started out as a law student and a part-time substitute teacher in Fort Worth ISD schools. And I only subbed in the Dunbar Pyramid. That's my family's legacy, and that's where I wanted to serve. And it was there that I started to see, I would say, the inequities in the classroom. And I related to the students a lot, and I decided, you know what, law school is not for me, but education is, and that's began my path. I've been a teacher, I've been an assistant principal, a principal, and then a director of policy. But what led me to run for office, I have a son. I have an African-American son. And he started in private school, I'll just be honest, in private Christian school. And so my excitement was to place him in public schools when he reached public school age. And when I entered the school system here in Crowley ISD, my son was like every article I've ever read about the African-American experience, specifically for male students. And so my kid, who had always been a charming young man, an intelligent young man, he wasn't there long before they were speaking about like his inabilities or his behaviors. And that wasn't true. And so I left Crowley schools, took him back to private school. And I saw this as an opportunity when the opportunity presented itself to run, for me to bring what I had learned in my profession and what I was passionate about to Crowley ISD's board, and hopefully make a difference for not just my own son, but for so many others. And so that's what brought me here, learning about, I guess, the longer you work in education, the more that you learn. You go back to school, you get your master's, you go back, you start working on your doctorate, and you have all of these surreal experiences that you now can connect with research. And so I feel like this has been my opportunity to change things from the inside, to be a voice. We don't normally have a seat at the table, but I do, and I get to speak on behalf of my brothers and sisters and their children and this community, and help influence and shape policy going forward. So many school districts and schools, we have missions and mottos and visions that say all students, and we speak about student achievement, but yet all students aren't achieving, and we're not even set up to serve all students. So that's what brought me here. I'm passionate about change, and that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That leads us into this question that's very concerning for me, particularly as an educator for 25 years at all levels and we'll get, I'll ask you, Aisha, this one. Black and brown people in America are quickly becoming a majority. In our great state of Texas, we are already showing that we have the lowest percentage of voter participation. How can this education system in our state be used as a tool of change for this, primarily to address some of the issues that already have been stated this morning? We know that voting is our voice and it can bring us change. Aisha, how would you respond to that?
So there is a Texas law that every single high school that has more than 20 seniors is supposed to have voter registration there on campus. But there was a study done from the Texas Civil Rights Project that found only about 38% of high schools are actually adhering to this law. And this is Texas law, but there is no penalty for not adhering to that law. So now you have a law that says we have to get all of these young people registered. A lot of schools are not following through with that. So you're depriving students of a really convenient way to get involved with the voting process. So we have to make sure that every single high school in our community is following through with offering that opportunity to register to vote. So here are some things. If you are a registered deputy and you can register folks, work with those schools to develop a plan to make sure that that school is offering registration, that you know it's going on, and be active in it. Or make sure that you're training and deputizing some of your librarians and your teachers and other faculty and staff so that they too can be a part of that process. But we know our young folks are standing up for themselves and they see all these horrible things going on with this administration. So we know our young folks are going to tend to be progressive in their votes, and they're more than likely going to vote blue. So starting with our schools adhering to that state law will be a great way to use our education system to directly influence increasing in voting. Now, we also know that our young folks are taking a stand for themselves. So making young people aware of this law so they can advocate to their own schools is truly important. Now, everything is virtual right now. We have so many schools, especially in our big urban areas, that have all virtual learning, but they still need this key information. Every school is supposed to register those students twice a year. So there should be some voter registration discussion going on right now. So contact your high schools, contact your districts to make sure that they have some sort of email, some sort of program, something going out to those students telling them, hey, you know, register to vote. I was just having this conversation with Councilman Casey Thomas about some things we could do here in the Dallas area. And you can perhaps send out a link so that those students can register online and then have a day where they can come to school and then they can go ahead and complete the registration process safely. But we have to make sure that we're getting each and every one of our young folks registered to vote. And that'd be the best way to use that education system to increase that voter registration.
Thank you, Aisha. I'm glad you laid out, and I'm sure if anyone needs to have follow-up on that, you can reach out to her and the Texas Democratic Party to help you identify tools that will particularly work in your area. Dr. McLeod, you participated in a panel discussion titled Race in America School. And one of the things you talked about was how to use policy to drive equity in our schools. Can you talk a little bit about that today and maybe offer ways in which we can actually help move those type of policies forward?
You know, there's a lot that we can do at a state level, but I don't want to neglect the value and necessity of being active at the local level. Aisha talked about the Texas Education Policy Institute that we organized to try and organize a voice and train people on how to influence legislation. From that, Aisha ran for school board, and then we also had Darlene Bro that ran for the Alief School Board and is now vice president. I'm saying that to say, if you want to change how your local school district organizes and operates and educates, you do it with the local school board. They have more influence on what happens in that school district for all of those students than what Aisha can do at the state level. For example, if we are no longer comfortable with how the number of students that are referred for in-school and out-of-school suspension. And just FYI, in Harris County, there's 25 districts. In those 25 districts, the highest demographic subset for in-school and out-of-school suspension was males, number 1, African Americans, number 2, then followed by Latinos, low SES, special ed, and we are in all of those categories. And what I'm saying is school board officials have the privilege of looking at the student code of conduct, determining what determines the suspension, what other alternatives there are. Some school districts have even voted, we're not going to suspend children that are at this age or lower. They're in the position to do that. If there's inequities that are obviously present that are for some of our most marginalized populations, school board officials have the opportunity to talk to the superintendent and say, you know what, we need to have an equity audit. We need to do something about what's happening to children who look like this, have this socioeconomic out status. We need to do something with our AP dual credit. School board members are in a position to do that. They can create the policy at a local level without even having to talk to Mike Morath. And if parents want to get involved, if teachers want to get involved, what I would suggest do is vote. If you're not going to run for those positions, you need to put someone in that position who will speak boldly and courageously for what you need for your system. And last thing, I was in a beauty shop and I was talking to this lady and she says, well, you know, my daughter goes to a school that's predominantly African-American and Hispanic, but mostly African-American. And she says in her AP class, her dual credit class, in a predominantly Black high school, in the dual credit and AP class were the white students that they had, the few Asian students that they had, and the few Latinos. So even at a predominantly African-American high school, Black children are getting access to AP and dual credit courses. Part of that is how do we educate? How do school board members hold superintendents accountable for ensuring that parents have what they need? And even if they don't, how do you prepare your school counselors to guide students along the way? How do we disrupt this comfortability with African-American students being at the bottom of every demographic subset? So when we talk about policy, yes, we should advocate it at the state level and national level, but start at the local level and put people on the school board who will create policy that changes the condition for our children.
Thank you, Dr. McLeod. Mia, I want to still address that notion of equity in line with where we are in our national election. And we know that you currently serve as the director of the Equity and Excellence in Fort Worth ISD. Several other districts across the nation either have or are beginning to establish offices of equity. We have for so long been aware of equality, and now we understand the importance of equity just as much as the notion of equality. How do offices like this position, districts and other educational institutions establish more equitable cultures? And then I would like for you to tie it into how can a Biden-Harris administration support work like this? This helps us to develop that Black agenda as well.
So 2 things. First, I want to address Dr. McLeod's last response, which was right on time. With regards to the board members that you place on your school board at the local level, we do have the power to influence. We do have the power to direct our finances, to elicit these equity audits, to identify the disparities specifically in our districts. But voter participation in school board elections are the lowest of the low. And so often we have board members that sit on boards ceremonially. And so I do encourage that people get to know their local school board candidates as much as we get to know our national candidates, so that we do identify people who are courageous and bold in their decision-making authority to make sure that we do create equity for our students. Now, I would say departments and divisions of equity would be the manifestations of that type of bold and courageous leadership, because bold and courageous board members hire bold and courageous superintendents, and bold and courageous superintendents create divisions and departments for equity so they can address those inconsistencies in our school systems. School systems are just bureaucracies, and they're underfunded bureaucracies. But at the same time, we have to decide what is important and where we put our resources and where we put our emphasis. Equity offices do change the culture of an organization because it requires us to examine ourselves. It requires employees to examine themselves. It requires us to examine our systemic practices, rather it's hiring and the type of teachers that we put on the front lines to interact with our Black and Brown students. It definitely looks at how we implement and our discipline practices. Are we suspending kids for issues that are out of their control? Where is our money being directed for social emotional supports for our students? And often behaviors and core or low academic performance are also manifestations of those lacking supports. And also facilities planning. When we look at everything through an equity lens, we make sure that our students, all students, have everything that they need to be successful. What is the classroom looking like on the east side versus what does the classrooms look like on the west side? What is the teaching tenure of the teacher in front of our most marginalized students, and what is the teaching tenure on the side of town with the most affluence? And so these practices, these manifestations of equity and looking at everything, it allows us to truly examine the barriers to academic achievement, and then to start to dismantle those barriers and create equitable practices and opportunities and supports for all students. And your last question, you asked me a very big question. How can we do this in a Biden-Harris, how can they support? That's a really big question. Facilities is often a lacking opportunity, a lacking area. It's very expensive for the local school boards to fund that. And so there's an opportunity to provide some financial support for that. I think my other biggest thing would just be the reverence that we give the teaching profession. COVID-19, the pandemic identified how essential we consider our educators to be, but when we compare how we treat our educators in regards of compensation, the requirements to become an esteemed educator in this country, when we compare that internationally, the United States does not measure up. So it would be nice to have some incentives to bring people to our profession, but also regard them as the professionals that they are. Teachers, educators make a fraction of the income as compared to other professionals with the similar requirements for education in their background. So I would say helping to change education as a nation should be a national priority and not just constantly a death by test. So many mandates from the federal level are related to testing. We test students at every single juncture, at every single grade level, as compared to our international partners who are outperforming us, who only test in key places, which are the transitions between maybe lower elementary to the secondary level. So I would say changes in policies that could help bring strength and proficiency to the education field, providing funding for IDEA, where so many of our African American and people of color sit, special education, and also bringing monies to help make sure that we desegregate our schools. And if we're not going to desegregate our schools, at the very least, we need to make sure that our schools are equitable and so that our students get every opportunity to perform and learn in the best environment possible. I'm gonna stop talking because it's a big question. I think we could talk on that just all day.
If you don't mind, I'd like to follow up with that just a little bit. So I've had the honor and pleasure of being named the co-chair of Texas Educators for Biden, along with Dr. McLeod, who's been named as chair as Higher Education for Biden, and Councilman Thomas for Black Male Educators for Biden. And one thing that is so exciting about this campaign is they are actually listening to educators when it comes to education policy. So we sit at the table and we discuss education, what it realistically looks like for our districts, for our teachers and our students. And from there, we've been able to create some policy points and priorities for Biden that he will adhere to once he assumes the presidency and we have a new Secretary of Education. So everybody who is in education is so excited and welcome and invited to be a part of the campaign as we craft those policy agendas. As you were saying, Mia, those are the things that the Vice President needs to be aware of. But he does know that teachers are the ones who can give him that information, and educators and education advocates. And he is definitely listening to us as he forms his ideas of education as our president.
Well, you all, I'm sure that the party went on. I actually was cut off, but I think we were still right on point. I also want to ask a question, a lighter question that I actually think helps us to understand the level of creativity and just resilience we have as Black people. We've talked about inequity. Can you talk a little bit about who we are as Black students, as Black teachers? What, you know, when we're operating at our best, what are teachers and parents in the community able to see from particularly from students that have this Black culture, this lived experiences of being Black? What do we bring to the table as learners, as teachers?
Carla, I'll address that, or at least start off. And I have to say, coming to Houston to go to school, I went to undergrad at University of Houston, but I did my graduate work at TSU. And when you talk about what we bring to the table, the value and importance of HBCUs in our community is absolutely immeasurable. HBCUs put out Barbara Jordans and Nikki Newlands, and if it were not for an HBCU investing in me, not only as a student, but then 12 years as a professional, where I had a chance to work side by side with a legend like Carole Robinson, where I was just a quiet, nervous, shy professor, and then Glenn Lewis pulled me to the side and said at a conference, and after he heard me speak, he goes, "Does the president know who you are? Come here." And just to have those mentors and people reach back and reach out and lift you up, I think HBCUs represent Black excellence. If it were not for a TSU, I would not be dean of Texas A&M University at Commerce. It was that platform. It was those investing in me. And when you talk about what we bring to the table, when we step up and we invest and we pour into our students, we pour into our faculty produce some of the best and the brightest in the world. And it's because of that network. When we use our human capital, our intellectual capital, and we invest that into our future, those seeds that we plant, we reap a crop, a harvest of brilliance. And so when you talk about the future and the faith, it starts with us investing in our students. And I'm gonna tell you, if we don't do anything else, we must take care of our HBCUs. We have to take care of our HBCUs. We need to give back as alums. We need to support and protect, because that is where coal turns into diamonds.
Dr. McLeod, I appreciate that, you know, as a graduate of Howard University and a longtime faculty member at Texas Southern University, and, you know, just even attending predominantly Black independent school districts, that I can so remember so many of my teachers. And one of the most important things I can remember is how we were, how excellence was engrounded in the notion of character and service. So Mia, would you like to expound on that same question?
So I'm going to speak from a personal standpoint on that. I did not have an African American teacher until I went to college. And I really didn't know that impact until I had that experience. And then coming into education and working specifically at the Young Women's Leadership Academy with my students who were primarily African American girls. I saw the importance of having role models who look like yourself. And so I think it is very important that we support our HBCUs and that we create educators, as well as all of the other professions, but that we have people in front of our students who look like them, who relate to them, and who can provide them with a culture responsive and relevant education in their classroom so that they can see themselves, see pride in themselves. I was a history teacher, guys, and I taught that curriculum where we begin in this country as slaves, but we have such rich history, and I can thank Aisha for, the legislation and the new curriculums that we're having in our K through 12 school education systems. But the importance of knowing who we are and having someone stand up and providing those enriched opportunities so that you can experience that pride, so that you can be encouraged, and so that someone can tell you all all that you can become and all that you can do. So much of what we do and how we teach our students and how we interact are from the frame of whiteness. And so without having that perspective, that voice in our classrooms and our systems, we don't prepare our students to reach their full capacity and be all that they can be.
Aisha, would you like to expound on that as well?
Definitely. I do want to talk about a little bit about how systematically, here in Texas especially, there are some things in place that may negatively affect the Black pipeline of teachers who we need for our students. And we know that especially at the elementary level, when they're exposed to a Black teacher, a teacher who looks like them, the chance of them going to college increases exponentially. So we have to make sure that we're increasing that pipeline to get more teachers of color here for our students. But there's been a new certification program approved last year in Texas called EdTPA. And EdTPA requires you to do something that we've never required before in Texas, and that is film yourself for 10 minutes with a subset of students, and you send it in to some raters, and then those raters tell you whether or not you're prepared to serve as a teacher. Well, the problem with these raters are many of them are not in Texas. They're in states where you don't see many Black and brown teachers and you don't see many Black and brown students. So when it comes to the way that we have to address our students, the relationships we build with our students, what's most important to make sure our students are prepared for the future, they may not understand that connection and that purpose. So what has been found in states that already utilize EdTPA is most Black candidates who are going through the EdTPA program are having a lot of problems when it comes to that rating. And people aren't understanding why they don't use this proper vocabulary and why they have different relationships and why they act different ways towards their students. Regardless of the success of that or whether that lesson is going in a positive direction, if they don't understand or they don't like the way that teacher is communicating, then they rate that teacher very, very low. We're aware of that here in Texas, but it is not proactively being addressed. And right now we're only in the pilot phase, so we don't even have enough data to see how it's negatively affecting our Black teacher pipeline. So I encourage you to be aware that that's going on. All those teacher candidates that you know and pre-service teachers, first of all, encourage more of our young folks to go into the teaching profession. We see less and less of our young people who are interested in becoming teachers, but we need them to be the ones who are directing our future. And once they get into those colleges over the next 2 years, we have to keep a close eye on EdTPA to make sure that our Black teachers are getting a fair chance at being certified and serving in our classrooms. That's extremely important. And that's going to be one of the biggest hindrance to making sure that we have that Black representation in the teaching profession if we don't keep an eye out on that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Our late, great, honorable Barbara Jordan has a quote that I actually still believe is quite relevant today, and it's education remains the key to both economic and political empowerment. She stated that, as you all know, some years ago. In bringing our panel to an end, talk a little bit about that, particularly today being Labor Day, and connecting this sense of education to employment and all of this in terms of, we have elected officials. I'm looking at State Reynolds, and he's been shaking his head throughout the panel of how that relates to us voting in policy. And again, she says education remains the key to both economic and political empowerment. And if you could take us home with that in response.
Education is the key to social mobility. And if we want our children to be agile and to have choice, we've got to we need schools that not only are empathetic to our students, but we need them to graduate with more than just a happy face. We need them to be competent. Mm-hmm. And so making sure that we're putting what our students need to make a choice, whether it's college, career, military service. But when we look at that from another level, and I'll close by saying this, once you have gotten put in a position where you have influence, where you have impact, reach back and lift somebody else up, mentor somebody, give back to someone who's aspiring. We shouldn't have to learn things the hard way. Let our children learn from our lessons. Put things in place now for those that are trying. Don't be afraid to hire Black. And, I don't want to say too much on that, but I'm going to say, once you get into position, lift somebody else up. And sometimes we'll just, too many Blacks, you can't, being the first African-American female dean at this university, first female and first African-American, one of the things I want to do is diversify our college, our faculty. And what I'm saying is give back once we kind of get to a place. We lift as we rise, and lift as we move up, lift those that are on their way behind us.
Thank you for that. I appreciate. Don't hesitate to give back Black. With that, Mia, can you offer some closing words?
Well, it's very cliche, but I do believe that education is the great equalizer. And so, as Dr. McLeod said, the quality of education that we provide our students is paramount. I also believe very strongly in mentorship. We've set a lot at the feet of our educators, but we as a community also have a responsibility to reach back to our students and make sure that we are pushing them, advocating on their behalf, making sure that they have every opportunity with regards to our education system. I also believe that education should also be empowering. Of course, we want our students to achieve and we want them to receive quality instruction, but we should be teaching our students the importance of voting, and we should be teaching our students the importance of advocacy. And so I believe that education has grown tremendously, and it needs to evolve even more with regards to what we are requiring our students to do. Our students need voice. We need to give our students voice so they know how to speak for what they need on their own. But I'm gonna close with that. I believe I get very passionate when I think about our students not having voice. I think that is the part that clenches my heart the most. Because when you take the time to talk to a student, they know exactly what it is that they are missing and exactly what it is that they need in their school system. But so often their voices are ignored. And so I believe it is our responsibility as a community to be that voice and also to provide that platform for our students.
Thank you, Mia. It's nice to hear, and we know that teaching is a form of advocacy and action. So thank you for reiterating that. Aisha.
Yeah, I want to use my last words to follow up with what Mia said about empowering students. I truly believe education is about empowering our young folks so that they can pave a better path than what has been there before. So I want to talk about African American studies. It was passed statewide on April 17th. And now those TEKS are available for every single school district in Texas. But it won't be in a classroom if the district is not going to offer it, if there is not a classroom teacher who's willing to teach it. So I get emails all the time, like, how can we make sure that we actually have African Americans at our school? Reach out to those trustees. As we've been talking about, that local level politics is so important. Make sure your trustees are aware that that course has passed and it is finished and finalized, and it is available to all students in Texas high schools. And two, make sure you have a teacher in that school who's willing to not only teach that course, but teach it with fidelity. Do some deep diving and some soul searching. And when you talk about it with passion, and use a lot of primary resources and really get students engaged in the richness of that information. When we put African American studies together, we've reached out to historians and community leaders from all across the country to figure out, okay, what are those gaps in Black history that aren't typically taught to students? What more do we need to teach them so they can understand how truly impactful we've been to the building of the American society? And so we put all of that together and we made an impactful course. I really want every single student to have access to it. So again, make sure your trustees are aware that that course is available, and talk to some teachers, some social studies certified teachers, to make them aware as well, to tell them about different trainings and resources offered across the state of Texas so that our students actually can enroll in that course and get that rich information. And thank you so, so much for having this panel today. So we have an opportunity to talk about how we can improve education for our Black students.
Thank you, Aisha, Mia, and Dr. McLeod. This was a great discussion for us. Tracy, thank you for allowing all of us to have it. Just want to end with, we know both formal and informal education helps us to reach our greatness. It helps us to not only discover who we are, but who we are and what we've done to not only survive the struggle, but thrive and be resilient in this culture. So I'm looking forward to listening to all the other upcoming panels.
Thank you so much, Dr. Braley, for moderating such an incredible conversation. As someone who comes from a long line of educators, it is always so great and so important to hear about how education is such a foundation to success. From there, we're gonna have a couple words from some of our elected officials, as well as upcoming candidates before we roll into our next panel. We will first start with Representative Synfronia Thompson.
Hi, I'm State Representative Synfronia Thompson, District 141. I'm in Northeast Houston, and I'm serving my 24th term in the Texas Legislature. I am the chairperson of Public Health, and in that committee, we take care of a lot of things, all the way from dealing with animals, food safety, health care in a variety of areas, medicine, doctors, hospitals, just a whole lot of things. And one of the things that we want to do is during this process is to make sure that we are passing laws that are beneficial and helpful to people, the ordinary people just like you and I. I also want to talk to you just a little bit about why you need to make sure that you do your census information. It's not that we're trying to be nosy into your business, but this is why census is so important. You see, we get money back from the federal government that we send up there based upon the larger population that we have down here in Texas. Here's what some of that money is for. We have families that need WIC programs for young babies. We have young children who need to be on children health insurance. We have persons who needs to go to the hospital but have no insurance. We call this indigent health care. We have people who need mental health services, sometimes outpatient services and sometimes in-hospital services. We have roads and bridges and streams and rivers. We have so many other things. And you know what? A lot of times I have my constituents says, why don't we have more stores in our areas that sell this or sell that? All that depends upon the population that we have. The bigger the population, the more opportunities that we can have a whole lot of things. So you see, by September the 30th of this year, if you haven't already, please get your information in, because we want to make sure that we get all of these services we need. We need money for public education. We need money for higher education. We need money to train people to go and get better jobs and better opportunities. And we need to be able to take care of our senior citizens better than what we've been able to do so far. So it is very important that you and I make sure that all our friends, all our family members, make sure that they go and send back their census data. We only do it every 10 years, and this 10 years is very important. September the 30th is our deadline. Do it, and do it now.
And now we are going to hear from Judge Stacey Williams.
Okay, it's recording.
I am Judge Stacey Williams, and I'm the Democratic nominee for the Texas Supreme Court, Place 7. The Texas Supreme Court issues decisions daily affecting our lives, and it is the highest court in our state for civil matters. By that I mean all issues not criminal. For example, issues such as probate, family, juvenile, personal injury, oil and gas, and real estate. Let me give you 3 reasons why the Texas Supreme Court is relevant. Number 1, vote by mail. The Texas Supreme Court rejected expanding vote by mail during this COVID pandemic, making it difficult for voters under the age of 65 who don't want to vote in person because of fear of contracting COVID. Number 2, evictions and foreclosures. The Texas Supreme Court lifted the moratorium on foreclosures and evictions, even though the state continues to experience record high levels of unemployment and many Texans simply can't pay their rent or mortgages. Number 3, redistricting. After the legislature meets and redraws the maps, any legal challenges will be heard in the state courts rather than the federal courts. And the Texas Supreme Court will have the final say-so on all issues regarding redistricting. Now more than ever, we need to focus our attention on who sits on the Texas Supreme Court. In the 174-year history of the Texas Supreme Court, there has never been an African American female. It is time that our voices be heard. I bring over 27 years of diverse legal experience. Not only am I a 2-term district court judge, I've been a trial lawyer and administrative judge with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I've also been a municipal court judge and an arbitrator for the U.S. Postal Service, the Federal Mediation Conciliation Service, Dallas Area Rapid Transit, and the National Association of Securities Dealers. I'm a graduate of the Georgetown University Law Center in Washington, D.C., and Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. It is time that we elect qualified, experienced people to the Texas Supreme Court. I am Judge Stacey Williams, candidate for the Texas Supreme Court, Place 7.
Sounds good.
So grateful for those words from some of our incredible elected officials and candidates. I am now going to turn it over to Representative Nicole Collier, who will be moderating our criminal justice reform panel and discussing how we can find a better path forward. Representative Collier.
Thank you so much. I want to thank everyone for being here today. I want to thank the Tarrant County Coalition of Black Democrats, the Tarrant County Democratic Party, and Tracy Scott with the Black Women's PAC, and the Tarrant County Central Labor organization, all the sponsors of this group, this forum. I just want to thank you guys for inviting me and allowing me to be part of the conversation, because it's so important that we have these talks during this time, during this season, as we try to move forward in a positive direction. So with that, I want to go ahead and get started with our panel. We have a great panel of people who are going to be talking about criminal justice issues with us today. So first we have Judge Stephanie Boyd. She is a judge, a criminal district court judge out of Bexar County in San Antonio. She was elected to the bench in she started serving in 2019. So we're glad to have her. Laya Brown, I hope I'm saying that right, Miss Brown. She's with the, she's the new legal director for the Texas Civil Rights Project. And so we're happy to have her. She's worked at ACLU as well. And then we also have Dr. Howard Henderson. Oh my goodness, this man is just like an expert in his field. In fact, the Texas Legislative Black Caucus, we rely on the information that he provides as he leads the Center for Justice Research and a professor of justice administration in the Barbara Jordan Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs at TSU. We're also happy to have Andre Johnson, local guy. Andre does some programming and rehabilitation for those who have recently left the prison system. So we're happy to have all of these speakers and guests on our panel. So I want to dive right into the discussion, because we want to know, I'm always interested in finding out what is the latest concern or the issues that are impacting our community. So I want to start with Andre Johnson and Judge Boyd. I want to throw the first questions out to you guys. And it deals with probation. Now, this is an issue that really I want to dive into, because I want to know more about what are you seeing now that we're in the pandemic. Are we seeing more people being placed into probation? Is probation being extended? And then what is happening to the people when they are on probation? You know, Andre, talk about the jobs. Is there employment available for people who are just leaving the prison system, and what kind of skills training can we get for them? Judge Boyd, please.
Oh, thank you. What I can tell you from what I see, because I work closely with trying to figure out what types of conditions, when people are placed on probation, what will make them more successful. And the probation community that we have here, they actually have programs set up to help participants seek employment. In my courtroom, I always require participants to obtain employment. And usually I will give them a deadline, but I've been extending those deadlines because of COVID. And what I try to do with probationers out of my court, I want them to have careers. And as everyone knows, once you have a felony conviction, or even if you're placed on deferred, people will still see that as a felony. When I first started practicing law in 1997, you could have a client who was placed on deferred. A company never asked if they have ever been placed on deferred. They were only asked if they've ever been convicted. And your client could always say, no, I've never been convicted of a felony. Now companies have started asking, well, have you been placed on deferred? So I've reached out to several companies. I know probation has reached out to several companies to see if they will accept persons who are on probation to work for them. And there are a lot of employers who will accept people and hopefully build them up where they can be careers. With my conditions, I will give people community service hours, but sometimes I will waive or probate those hours if they are in a trade school, if they are seeking a higher level of education. Because believe it or not, with felonies, people can be welders, but you just have to open it up to them. And one of the key questions I ask people who appear before me, especially the young offenders, is, what is your dream job? And many of them say, nobody's ever asked that for me. I don't know what my dream job would be. I don't know what I want to do in this world. And so once I have long conversations with them, they tell me what they're interested in, and then probation tries to find avenues where they can be creative in what they want to do and help them get employment. Of course, there are some things that you have to tell them you're not going to be able to have employment in that area because they do not and they will not accept anyone who has the criminal history that you have.
Absolutely. And Andre, thank you so much, Judge. Andre, can you pick up on how what type of resources are available for those that are coming out, and then what does the job outlook look like?
Well, the employers that we work with they're still hiring individuals with backgrounds. I think when you have such grassroots as like a reentry first stop, who gets out and develop those relationships and creates an employer consortium, then it makes it easier for those individuals to transition into employment when coming through a program like a first stop. Because we've already developed those relationships with those employers, we let the employers know the process when individuals come to our office and what they have to actually go through for as job prep and job readiness. Having an employer consortium is, I think it's a benefit because we get a chance to have a one-on-one relationship either with those hiring managers or with HR so that they are aware. I think it's important because one of the things that we do is get a chance to sit down with those employers and educate them on the different groups that's in the population. You may have many individuals in that population who are on probation, but however, one of the things we're able to educate those employers on is that you have two groups in that population. You have one group of individuals who have committed crimes and broke the law, and then you have another group of individuals who have committed crimes, broke the law, and they are criminal minded. That's two groups with two different mindsets. So what we do as a society, we just pretty much put everyone who's broken the law into that criminal pocket. So when we get a chance to work with those employers, we're able to share with them that broad brush of all these different individuals who have broken the law are not criminals. So they are more apt to give them that second chance.
Absolutely. Great concept. So Andre, question then, if and I don't know if you know the answer, and I may need to look this up, but if somebody was working and they have the background of, a criminal record, and they lost their job because of the COVID-19, are they qualified for unemployment benefits?
Yes, it goes across the board, period. I mean, if these individuals are working, they're entitled to unemployment benefits just like any other citizen. The things that come across with the reentry population that they may come into, I guess, have a barrier is things like voting or registered voting. But as far as unemployment benefits, if I am working, I do those benefits.
Absolutely. That's of course, if their employer paid into the unemployment
Yes.
system. And then also you mentioned about voting. So one of the things that is always a misconception is that if you have a criminal record, you can't vote. But the real fact is as long as you're not on paper or parole or probation, you can vote.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So I want to get over to Dr. Henderson, but first let me recognize some of my colleagues. I see Representative Ron Reynolds and Representative Joe Deschantel here. I want to thank them for being a part of this. And I saw that Senator Royce West had joined. So thank you guys for getting on the call and being a part of this important conversation about the state of Black Texas. Okay, so Dr. Henderson, I'm going to move to you and ask you about some of the programs. I want to know, are there any barriers? Are you seeing any barriers to reintegration into the society from those who are just leaving the jail or prison system? And how can we as community partners help them at the city, the county, the state level?
Yeah, again, thanks for the conversation. I think number one, we have to address housing. We have thousands of individuals that are getting out of prisons every day. And because of the COVID-19 crisis, we've shifted all of our resources to the homeless population, which have left those individuals returning from prison without housing. There's one case I saw in the city of Houston where an individual came out of prison and had nowhere to live. He went to Austin to find a place to live. And so we have a housing issue, but I think bigger than that is we have an employment issue. Because of high unemployment rates, individuals who are getting out of prison have been pushed to the very bottom, and they're unable to afford housing, but also adequate place to live. And so we understand how housing inadequate employment feed into recidivism. Now, those are two main issues, but also more importantly, what can we do to address these issues? Number one, we have to push employers to begin to hire these individuals at much larger rates than what they're doing already. We're seeing this issue in the city of Houston. I'm hearing about it in Dallas, San Antonio, and a lot of these small towns. The other thing we got to do is we got to forget, we must not forget that there's a real issue and a real reality in Texas where a lot of individuals are getting out of prison and they're not going back to our major cities. And that's where we tend to put our focus. So I think we begin to evaluate what's happening in rural Texas because a lot of individuals are getting out of that space and going back to these small towns.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Henderson. So Ms. Brown, let me go to you because I want to talk to you about what you guys are seeing. You know, during this pandemic, the governor of Texas has issued various executive orders that will change the way criminal justice is handled in Texas. So most recently, you know, one of the recent things we saw is the removal of PR bonds, personal recognizant bonds. We also saw for certain offenses. And then we also saw how they changed the rules in the middle of the game, basically by saying, oh, you must follow our order. And if you don't, then you can be penalized, but then they walked it back. So what are you guys seeing and doing in response to some of these changes? And what can we do to help promote your work?
Thank you. Thanks for the question and thanks for the invitation. I'm going to, part of the answer piggybacks on what Dr. Henderson was talking about, specifically to the extent that the rural jurisdictions, we're starting to see some shenanigans. So the big picture is that COVID has simply exacerbated all of the existing challenges and flaws in the criminal legal system, specifically in the policing system. So the same challenges, the same, you know, socioeconomic barriers, all of those pre-COVID issues, COVID has just amplified. And what we have seen particularly, I'm sure this is happening all throughout Texas, but I'm gonna speak to what I have personal knowledge of. What we've seen in some of the less metropolitan areas and some of the areas that get less attention is that the counties and the police have used these executive orders, have used these COVID emergency management orders to bring even more policing and even more enforcement to communities that are already heavily policed. And that's a discretion, that's a use of discretion. You could have people sort of taking a more education approach to why we need to be wearing masks, why we need to shelter at home, you know, when the county says shelter at home, handing out masks and PPE to people who might not have access, as opposed to issuing fines that people who are already in financial hardship can't afford to pay, and locking people up. And so what we sort of a hypothesis that my program had was that we would see complaints go down during COVID, like the intakes that we get, the complaints that we get about disproportionate criminal law enforcement and brutality and all that kind of stuff. We thought, well, you know, while the whole country is sort of laying low, maybe the police would be too. And that has not been the case. The intakes are up as before. And I think what we see around the country is similar. And so I think that's the issue. I think what we're doing is sort of working where there is political will, right? And this is part of where, like, what the help is. A lot of this is political will. You know, Governor Abbott moves by executive order. And some of, you know, the county executives, right, like, need political support. And so I think part of it is building the political will and the political power to take more of a sensible approach to public safety and public health, which doesn't have a default reflexive arrest, lock up, issue, you know, fines and fees. And so you didn't ask me this, but the other part about probation, and the barriers to people and reentry is not just that the felony convictions are barriers to employment and voting, but also the money that it takes to be on probation. And many people are being supervised simply to pay fines and fees. And so there's an opportunity, I think, for the masses, and where there's political will, to come together and say, should we really be saddling the taxpayers and the courts with people who are not dangerous to people who are not in that bucket, right? That bucket that Mr. Johnson talked about, the criminal minded, but simply continue to not be able to pay or are supervised because of payment. I think we got to disentangle the money part of it and really start holding our elected officials accountable for the budget, right? And where we allocate resources and really come together around a state budget and local budgets that can promote public safety without all this extraneous burden on people who are already oversaddled. I'm happy to hear the judge talk about dream jobs and whatnot, but it's very disappointing to hear that you got to come through criminal court and get all the way to probation to have somebody ask you for the very first time, right? Like, about your future. And so that underfunded schools, underfunded communities, underfunded arts programs, all of that contributes to why people are entering court in the first place. And so I think that spotlight, right, as much as it is on reentry, is stopping that pipeline in the first place, so that the probation and parole is not getting that 2 buckets, but that really we are being very reasonable, and only 1 bucket, right, is going to end up supervised, and that is the criminally minded folks. Not people who lacked opportunities and can get resources on probation, on parole, that they can never get as a law-abiding citizen. I mean, that's part of the problem. I didn't grow up here. I grew up in inner city Brooklyn, but once I got that at-risk label, the at-risk youth label, I got plenty of programs and community service and after school, all sorts of things that if I didn't have that label might not have been available. So I think it's about institutions and systems and asking, what are the reasons that masses and masses of non-violent people who pose no danger to us, what are the reasons that they are even having convictions in the first place?
Absolutely. In fact, great points, Ms. Brown. Absolutely. And I love how you just brought it all together, because we're going to get to policing as well. But I want to piggyback on what you talked about. You talked about discretion. I once asked, I'm in Tarrant County, and I remember asking DA Sharon, I said, why is it that more, African Americans tend to have longer and more convictions than their white counterparts? And she told me, she goes, I don't choose who comes to see me in my court. I mean, this is when she was a judge. She said, I don't choose, they're arrested and they're brought in, and then that's when the case is proven up or whatever. And so, but my response is, there's discretion. You talked about discretion, Ms. Brown. The police don't have to arrest everyone. In the state legislature, we push to have cite and release on nonviolent Class C misdemeanors, and just like traffic offenses, so we can prevent a Sandra Bland type of situation from happening again. We also have pushed for other measures to reduce sentencing. So, these are things that I want to talk about, is discretion. Judge Boyd, when you're talking about discretion, is there discretion in how long somebody stays on probation? And then let's talk about those fees. I know the fees feed into your budget, because the counties have to rely on the fees to help, pay the budget. And so the state, hasn't been doing as much in terms of that. But when they come back home, the county has to pick up a large portion of that cost. And so, they're relying on the judges to help offset those costs. So let's talk about the probation. How much discretion do you have? And then those fees, do you have discretion to waive those fees? And how does that work?
All right. When someone is placed on probation, first of all, I want to speak about discretion from the position of prosecutor, because I was a prosecutor and I was a defense attorney, and also from the position from being a judge. All right, so with regards to discretion as a prosecutor, I had been a defense attorney for close to 18 years before I became a prosecutor. So in regards to prosecutors, one, you need to have diversity of race, diversity of gender, and that results in diversity of experiences and diversity of thoughts. And you need to have a district attorney who's allowing the prosecutor to have their discretion. So when I was a prosecutor, I made all the decisions and I came in fully formed, right? And when I say fully formed, what I mean is I didn't get out of law school and immediately become a prosecutor. I was out of law school, was a defense attorney. So I had an idea of what justice was, because all prosecutors are supposed to be speaking justice. Now, from the standpoint as a judge, every prosecutor knows, every defense attorney knows that in my court, if both the defense attorney and the prosecutor agree that no, they're not offering this person probation, they want them to do prison time, the defense can ask for what they want, and I'll ask them why you're asking that specific amount of time. When the state says, I want this amount of time, I'll ask the state, why are you asking that? As a prosecutor, all of the people who were my second chairs and third chairs, I said, look, if you're going to offer somebody probation, I want to know why. If you're going to try to indict somebody, I want to know why. If you're going to offer them 2 years, 3 years, whatever it may be, I want to know why you're offering that. Because the Texas law, the range of punishment is extremely vast. 2 to 10 years, 2 to 20 years, 5 to 99 years or life. And so I would always tell people sitting with me, obviously, someone who's convicted of a third-degree felony, they have this wide range of punishment. If everybody was supposed to get 10 years for doing it, then the range of punishment would be 10 years. So I tell them to look at that. Now, with regards to fines and fees, in my court, as far as $1,500 fines, like the fines can go up to $10,000. I always, unless there is something that I think should be done differently, I will probate those fines. And for the public, what that means is if the person successfully completes their probation, they don't have to pay the fine. Because I think that probation should be designed for one thing, and it should be designed for rehabilitation. If it's not designed for rehabilitation, then that means you think that person should go to prison. So why are we doing probation to begin with? So I always will probate the fines. With regards to supervisory fees. Supervisory fees are part of how probation is able to have their probation officers. So with those, they are standard in my court because I've already given the person this fine that's been probated. And usually I would say the least amount of fine I've seen requested that defense has agreed to has been $2,500. And even when they agree to it, I will still probate it to give that person an opportunity to not financially be in dire straits while being on probation. Because when you look at it, I've had people in my court where they've been on deferred for possession of marijuana, state jail felony possession. And when I see that their fees are totally $8,000, I'm like, this is, you know, unbelievable that they owe these fees of $8,000 and this is the only thing that's holding them back. So yes, to handle that, I will probate. And I will tell you, I think a lot of the new judges that came in are probating fines as well, because really it's about rehabilitation.
Excellent. And I'm so glad that you are in that place where you are. And you talked about district attorneys, you know, being able to make that discretion. And one place that I've seen a change in, that's in Fort Bend County, where Representative Ron Reynolds is. They have a DA, Brian Middleton, and he has just really changed the way the criminal justice system is handled there. And so I'm just so proud of the work that he's doing. And so we need to make sure that we're electing people that have like mindsets and same types of goals for our community. So, you know, that's making sure that you understand who you're voting for, because this November, it's not going to be any more straight party ticket. That means you need to get to know your people that you're voting for. So you got to start from the top all the way down to the bottom and vote, you know, from the top to the bottom to see who you're electing. And these judges, oh my goodness, it's so important that we have judges in place that understand and are willing to make those hard decisions that others may not be willing to do, and give, you know, people opportunities. Because Andre, you talked about the mindset. You said that there's different types of people and the mindset. And so I want to tie both of those in with Ms. Brown and what you're talking about. What is being done to address this mindset? Is somebody born with a criminal mind? Is it something that they're taught and it's just a survival tactic? You know, help me understand this concept that you're talking about. And then Dr. Henderson, you can jump in too if you know something about, if you want to contribute to that. But I want to address this mindset because it's a vicious cycle. You know, if somebody is not doesn't have the resource.
Thank you for participating in this year's State of Black Texas, done in partnership with the Texas Coalition of Black Democrats and the Black Women's PAC. To support our incredible partners and to stay connected for future events, head over to txdim.co/blacktx. Thanks again.